the hit that took down 4 hospital officials in Limpopo. On the morning of October 19, 2007, the small, normally quiet town of Sashego in Limpopo province woke up to horror. Samson Mochikut Samego, a former hospital driver, walked into the Sashego hospital with a deadly purpose. Known to most staff as a calm man who rarely raised his voice, Samson didn't look like a killer when he entered the building that day. But beneath his calm exterior, rage had been boiling for months. Dismissed from his job earlier that year due to a fatal hit-and-run incident involving a patient, Samson had become increasingly bitter. Rumors had been circulating that he blamed senior officials at the hospital for ruining his life, and he had been quietly planning his revenge. Armed with a gun stolen from a hospital security guard, Samson made his way to the administration wing. He walked past nurses and staff without raising suspicion, heading straight for the offices of those he held responsible. Moments later, the sound of gunfire echoed through the corridors. Panic erupted as workers screamed and scrambled for cover. By the time it was over, 4 hospital officials lay dead, including the hospital's CEO. Some were shot at close range, execution style, in what police would later call a targeted killing. Ambulances rushed to the scene, but it was too late for the victims. What had been a place of healing had turned into a scene of chaos and death. The tragedy shocked the entire province, and even seasoned officers at the scene were shaken by the brutality. Before the shooting, Samson Samego had been a trusted driver at the Sashego hospital for nearly 5 years. Colleagues described him as quiet and dependable, never the type to cause trouble. But that image changed after a tragic hit-and-run incident involving one of the hospital's psychiatric patients. Samson was accused of reckless driving and later held responsible for the patient's death, leading to his dismissal. The decision shattered him. He believed the hospital had thrown him under the bus, and he refused to accept that he was the sole cause of the accident. Over time, his quiet demeanor grew darker, and friends noticed he had become withdrawn. He began drinking more and started talking about how unfairly he had been treated. Though no one took him seriously at the time, he mentioned that someone would pay for what had happened. What no one knew was that Samson had stolen a firearm from a hospital security guard weeks before the attack. Authorities later discovered he had been watching the routines of his former supervisors, planning the best time to strike. On the day of the shooting, he knew exactly where each target would be. He moved through the hospital methodically, determined to confront the people he felt had ruined his life. The security footage revealed a chilling calmness in his actions. When police finally apprehended him hours later, he showed no signs of remorse. The murders left the community of Sashego reeling. Families of the victims demanded justice, and hospital operations were suspended for days as investigators combed through the crime scene. In court, Samson Samego appeared stoic, refusing to answer questions about his motives. Prosecutors laid out a damning case, showing how he planned the murders weeks in advance. The stolen gun, ballistic evidence, and eyewitness testimony painted a picture of premeditated revenge. The families of the victims sat in court every day, hoping for closure. Some cried quietly, while others glared at Samson in disbelief. The trial was swift, and the outcome was never in doubt. The judge described the crime as cold-blooded and heartless, sentencing Samson to 18 years in prison. Many locals felt the sentence was too lenient given the number of lives lost. Questions were also raised about hospital security and how a dismissed employee had gained access to a weapon and the building. In the wake of the tragedy, the hospital installed stricter safety protocols and restructured its administration. But the emotional scars remained. For the families of the 4 officials, life would never be the same. Every October 19th, they hold private memorials to remember their loved ones. The name Samson Samego still sparks anger in the community, a reminder of how one man's rage turned a place of care into a scene of carnage. The killings at Sashego Hospital didn't just claim 4 lives, they shook an entire community to its core. Residents of the town, many of whom had relatives working at the hospital, couldn't believe that such violence had erupted in a place meant for healing. Candlelight vigils were held outside the hospital gates in the days that followed, with people gathering to pray, cry, and ask why this had happened. Church leaders condemned the violence and called for unity and peace during Sunday sermons. Local radio stations played somber music and read messages from listeners expressing their grief. Shops in the area closed early for several days, and schools held moments of silence for the victims. Children who had seen the ambulances and police cars were left frightened and confused. For many hospital staff, returning to work became a terrifying challenge. Some quit entirely, unable to walk the same halls where their colleagues had died. Counselors were brought in to help survivors deal with the trauma, but the healing process was slow. People whispered about Samson on the streets, wondering how a man they once knew had carried out such brutality. Journalists came from across the country, and for a short while, Sashego was the focus of national headlines. Even government officials visited the hospital to offer condolences and promises of better security. Yet behind the speeches and headlines, the grief was deeply personal. For families had been torn apart, and a town had lost its sense of safety. The scars ran deep, and some wounds residents feared might never fully heal. As the years passed, the Sashego hospital shooting faded from national memory, but the families left behind were never the same. Thandi Malapo, the widow of the hospital CEO, struggled to raise her 2 sons alone. She remembered the moment police came to her door and how her knees gave out when they told her the news. Her husband, a man dedicated to improving public health, was gone in an instant. She later revealed in interviews that she had warned him about Samson's anger, but he had brushed it off. Another victim, Lethabo Mashishi, was a newly promoted administrator who had just started her dream job. Her mother still kept her daughter's ID badge on the living room wall, refusing to take it down. The children of one victim had to undergo therapy for years, haunted by nightmares and the knowledge that their parent was gunned down at work. Some hospital workers who witnessed the shooting never returned to the medical field. They spoke about living with guilt, fear, and recurring memories of the blood-stained floors. The government had offered compensation to the families, but most said no amount of money could ever make up for what was lost. Every year on the anniversary of the shooting, a small group gathers at the hospital entrance. They light candles and say prayers, their faces a mix of sorrow and strength. For them, this isn't just history, it's a part of their everyday lives. They hope that by remembering, others will never forget what happened. The victims' names are carved into a granite plaque at the hospital's entrance, a silent reminder of a day that should never have happened. The tragedy at Seshego Hospital forced the healthcare system in Limpopo to re-evaluate its approach to employee grievances and workplace safety. Investigations revealed that Samson had made several complaints before his dismissal, many of which were ignored. Experts later said this was a warning sign, a missed opportunity to defuse a growing crisis. The hospital implemented stricter mental health assessments for staff and created a hotline for reporting threats or concerning behavior. Security measures were upgraded across all provincial hospitals, including mandatory ID checks and tighter firearm controls for security personnel. The Department of Health also introduced staff counseling programs to deal with trauma, stress, and workplace disputes. Though these changes came too late for the victims, they were seen as a necessary step toward preventing future tragedies. Community leaders held town hall meetings to promote nonviolence and conflict resolution. Schools introduced basic mental health education and awareness about how to seek help when feeling overwhelmed. Over time, the Seshego community slowly began to heal, but the wounds remained visible to those who lived through the nightmare. Journalists covering the 10-year anniversary of the massacre found many residents still deeply affected. "We don't want sympathy," one nurse said. "We want change and understanding." The case became a tragic symbol of how ignored anger and poor conflict handling can lead to devastation. Samson Semego is still serving his sentence. Meanwhile, Seshego continues to rebuild, one day at a time, carrying the memory of 4 lives stolen too soon. After his arrest, investigators and psychologists tried to understand what pushed Samson Mochikut Semego to murder. A forensic psychologist assigned to the case spent hours interviewing Samson at the holding facility. He described Samson as emotionally detached, intelligent, and eerily calm when discussing the killings. Samson never cried or showed remorse, not even when talking about the victims' families. When asked why he did it, his response was cold. "They ruined my life. I just even the score." He believed he had been wrongfully dismissed and scapegoated for an accident that, in his view, the hospital could have prevented. Further interviews revealed he had grown up in a strict, sometimes violent household, where expressing emotions was discouraged. Former colleagues remembered him as polite but distant, someone who bottled up everything inside. The psychologist's report stated that Samson exhibited signs of suppressed rage, narcissistic traits, and long-term resentment. But what shocked many was how methodical and deliberate his plan had been. He had written down names, schedules, and notes about hospital layout in a small black diary found at his home. There were no pleas for help, no attempts to speak to lawyers or unions before the act. Only a quiet spiral into vengeance. In court, experts testified that while Samson may have had emotional trauma, he was fully aware of his actions and capable of making rational choices. His case became a chilling reminder of what can happen when inner turmoil is ignored or untreated. While many wanted to label him as mentally ill, the final assessment confirmed. He was angry, not insane. And he had chosen revenge over forgiveness. The Seshego Hospital shooting echoed far beyond Limpopo. It sparked a national debate on workplace safety, mental health, and conflict resolution. In the weeks after the tragedy, news outlets across South Africa aired panel discussions with experts, union leaders, and psychologists. They explored questions like, how could this happen? What signs were missed? Could someone have stopped it? One glaring issue was how dismissed employees, especially in government roles, often feel discarded without support or follow-up care. Samson's case was not isolated. It highlighted a dangerous pattern of unresolved workplace grievances in the public sector. Trade unions began pushing for reforms, demanding that exit counseling and mediation be made mandatory in cases of dismissal. Some called for security upgrades at all public hospitals, especially in vulnerable rural areas. The National Department of Health responded by setting up a task force to evaluate threats in high-risk environments like clinics, emergency rooms, and mental health units. Meanwhile, psychologists urged the public to talk openly about emotional stress and to destigmatize mental health support. Schools and community centers began offering free seminars about anger management and emotional literacy. Still, despite the growing awareness, the fear lingered. Many workers feared retaliation in their own workplaces and demanded better systems to report threats anonymously. Samson Semego's name became infamous, a symbol of how silence, shame, and vengeance can explode into tragedy. Documentaries, talk shows, and magazine articles covered the story for years. In a nation already battling crime and inequality, the massacre became one more painful chapter. Yet some saw it as a necessary wake-up call. A lesson written in blood, warning that when hurt is ignored long enough, it doesn't disappear, it strikes.